Okay. With the time being 7:05, I'd like to call the Government Operations Committee to order. Can I please have roll call?
Lencioni?
Yes.
Gems?
Yes.
Petrola?
Here.
Wirball?
Here.
Besner?
Here.
Weber?
Here.
Lokaitis?
Here.
Vogt?
Here.
Bongard?
Here.
Munn? Here.
All right. First, we have one item for the omnibus vote. Can I please have a motion and a second for that?
So moved.
So moved by Besner, seconded by Petrola. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. That is approved. Next up, we have a presentation by our current acting chief, Eric Majewski. Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you. Good evening. Proposal for a liquor license for a Class A1 license, Main Street Liquor LLC. The business will also have the same name, Main Street Liquor. It's located at 203 West Main Street. I believe there was going to be a DBA of Puffs and Pours. However, that DBA is in use, so they're just going to stick with Main Street Liquor as the name as well. This appeared earlier this evening before the Liquor Control and Commission advanced with a favorable recommendation. It should be noted that the applicant, Serena Patel, who's here tonight, has current active status state license for a liquor store called Shop and Save Liquor located in Antioch. The business is in good standing with the state, no issues with the Antioch Police Department. The applicant and myself can answer any questions at this time. Police Department recommends in favor of the license.
Any questions up here? Go ahead, Brian.
A couple questions. Before, when it was open and there was activity there, a lot of delivery trucks would stop on Route 31 to make deliveries. I brought this up before. I'm not sure if it was correct or not because then they closed for, I don't know, a year or longer. Are we confident that deliveries will be made in the back parking lot? Is that because to park on 31 to make deliveries is not really conducive to that location?
I can speak to the business owner to make sure that takes place, consult our traffic division as well if that becomes a problem. I personally am not aware of any issue as far as that's concerned, but obviously the owner is here.
Okay.
Sure
yeah, if we could just make sure they're not on 31. And then the other question, I just want to clarify, they're not serving any liquor in the store, it's just packaged
yes.
items?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Very good.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, going off what Brian said, I have concerns about the traffic. When it was open, there were semis that had to back into it in blocks 31. To me, that's unacceptable. I don't see a way they can fix it. I don't understand. I don't think there's any way you can make that not happen. So therefore, I would be voting no on this. It's a bad location for the store because of the semis who have to deliver the product.
Understood.
Any other questions?
I'll move approval.
Seeing none, Lencioni is going to move for approval, seconded by Gem. Can I please have roll call vote?
Lencioni?
Yes.
Gem?
Yes.
Petrola?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Besner?
Yes.
Lokaitis?
No.
Vogt?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Munn? Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you very much, Chief. Next up, item 6A, we have a presentation by Bill Hanna.
Thank you, Chair. Item 6A is a recommendation to authorize the risk insurance renewal for the year beginning December 1st, 2023. The City Finance Department works with Assurance Agency, our broker, in coming up with renewal for our general liability, workers' comp, auto, property, and cyber coverage. We spent several months working on this, and we're happy to report that our renewal came in at $970,918, which is 1.7% more than last year. If you recall, last year we spent a lot of time making sure we could procure competitive cyber coverage. We were able to eventually do that at a cost of $94,000 for $4 million in coverage. This year we're happy to see that cost actually went down to just over $79,000. So that was about a $15,000 decrease in our cyber renewal coverage. All of our other coverages combined totaled $891,321 for our workers' comp, general liability, auto, and property coverage. That's an increase of just over 3.6%. We're pretty pleased with that given the challenges the property insurance market has undergone in the last couple of years. So overall, this turned out to be a really good renewal. There were no changes in any of the self-insured limits, deductibles, or retentions for the city. The city is maintaining travelers for all of its carriers except for workers' comp coverage that maintains with the Illinois Public Risk Fund. Happy to answer any questions tonight, and we have Anthony from Insurance here as well to answer any specific questions that you might have. So overall, a very happy renewal, and we're pleased to report it.
Thank you, Bill. Any questions for Bill?
Move for approval.
Seeing none? All right. Mr. Bongard is going to make a motion to
Second.
approve. Seconded by Wirball. Roll call, please.
Montioni?
Yes.
Gem?
Yes.
Petrella?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Besner?
Yes.
Kulkaitis?
Yes.
Folks?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Munn? Yes.
All right, that motion carries. Thank you very much. Now moving on to item 6B. Bill Hanna, go ahead, sir, you got the floor.
Thank you. Tonight we are discussing the 2023 property tax levy estimate for the city. This is just an estimate. The process will be, the estimate is discussed tonight, formally approved at the city council meeting November 6th, and the actual approval of the tax levy would be the first meeting in December. So this is really step one to kind of get that process started, is approving the actual estimate. We aren't actually approving or authorizing a levy amount. We're just discussing that formal official amount estimate for truth in taxation. So I kind of covered a little bit of what we're talking about tonight is the overall estimate. As a reminder, the city is home rule. We are not subject to PTEL, which is the property tax extension limitation law, also known as tax caps, which limit the tax levy increases between CPI or 5%, whichever is less. As a reminder, the tax levy estimate being discussed tonight would actually become revenue in next fiscal year's 24-25 budget. So property taxes are about 23% of all general revenues, roughly 14.6 million. Of that 14.6 million, 14.2 million is the amount that was extended last year for property taxes in the general fund, and that's kind of the main focus of what we're talking about tonight. Property taxes are considered a very inelastic revenue source. They don't fluctuate up and down like our other consumption-based revenues, like sales taxes and other taxes. So it's important to have a good structural balance between revenues that don't fluctuate a lot based on what the economy does, especially when you have 44% of our revenues being sales taxes and use taxes at 26.9 million in the current budget. This chart, as a reminder, the property taxes we're discussing tonight total roughly 10% of the total property tax bill. The rest of the property tax bill for property owners consists primarily of the school district and other taxing districts within the city. So this shows the various components of last year's property tax 2022 extension. The general purpose amounts consist of our corporate, fire, police protection, mental health board, and that's what we call our general purpose levies. Those were about 7.3 million last year. The other side of the amount is our amounts required for funding police and fire pensions. Those amounts totaled about 6.9 million. When you total those two, that equals about the 14.2 million we were talking about earlier. Our levy estimate does officially include an amount for bond and interest principal repayment. So that amount totals 10.1 million. However, as we've discussed before, that amount is completely abated by the city, and those principal and interest payments are paid with general fund revenues, utility fund revenues, or TIF fund revenues. But they aren't actually officially part of that total amount. So that is last year's 2022 extended amounts. This shows just a graphical proportion of those in terms of percentage of the whole. Police and fire pension amounts, roughly 48% of the total property tax levy, and the rest comprising the police and fire protection, corporate, and mental health board amounts. This shows the total property tax dollars levied over the last 9 years. The blue line at top is the total amount. You can see it was pretty flat for many years, and then some very moderate increases over the next several years. The line at the bottom is the police and fire pension portions of that levy, and you can see it's increased from roughly 2.7 million in 2014 to 6.8 million in 2022. And as that amount has gone up, proportion, then the similar amount, the general levy has gone down over the last several years from $9.3 million in 2014 to $7.3 million last year in 2022. So as the amounts required for police and fire pension contributions go up, the amounts available to fund general city services is going to go down. And that's, you can see last year we talked about keeping the levy dollars flat for general services. That was accomplished, you can see right there. While the total levy was increased, the amount was allocated strictly for police and fire pension funding, and those amounts, as you know, go straight to the pension fund to fund future police and fire pension fund benefit payments. The last 5-year levy increases we listed on the side, just as a reference: 4%, 1.9, 2.3, 4.97, and 3.39. This chart shows the increase in the city's equalized assessed valuation. We talked about this a little bit 2 weeks ago. For many years, the EAV was increasing roughly 4%, 2% per year. We had a larger than anticipated increase last year of 5.3%, and the information we just got from the county shows that EAV is going to increase roughly 10%. So that's mainly due to an increase in residential EAV. That's estimated to go up about 13% for the upcoming levy year, and that's making up the big proportion of an increase in the city's EAV for next year. So we talked about police and fire funding on the actuarial evaluation side. The actuarial evaluations we had done as of April 30th, 2023, those are increasing 7% on the police side, 9% on the fire side. As we talked about before, the goal of the policy is to achieve 100% funding for those by 2040. We didn't have any increases in the actuarial assumptions for this last year's valuation, and the total pension increases were roughly $566,000 over last year. A couple quick points on the mental health board levy. That's that other component under the general levy category. That was created in 1986 via referendum, initially approved with the understanding that the max tax rate would be 15 cents per EAV, but it was communicated to be no more than 5 cents, and eventually that target was set to be about 4 cents. The 2022 levy for the mental health board last year was $611,000, increased to $635,000, and the final tax rate wound up being 3.74 cents, so just a little bit lower than that target 4 cents that has been traditionally targeted with the levy. Based on the significant increase in the EAV, we looked at what a tax rate would generate at 3.5 cents instead of 4, and that would still generate $660,000, which is about $25,000 more than last year. So that has some consistency with what the intent was through the prior years to see a gradual increase in that levy, but it's less than the 4 cent target based on the estimated EAV that we're looking at. So just a quick summary on some of the considerations that went into developing the levy estimate recommendation. The cost of providing services continuing to increase as a result of CPI increases in many areas. We still have some pretty tight labor markets and some challenges with recruiting, retention of employees, and so we're going to see some increases in wages and benefits as a result of that going forward. On the positive side, we are seeing a reduced need to fund capital projects from general fund monies as a result of some of the changes we made last year, so that is one of the positive factors that went into the consideration. Overall, the economic outlook for next year is still positive for consumption-based revenues, but we are looking at city, police, and fire pension contributions probably continuing to increase over the next several years. Overall, we tried to come up with a moderate levy rate increase recommendation that provides some consistent funding, and so that we can avoid some of those spikes in the future, trying to avoid some of those, but keep it sort of steady and constant on a year-to-year basis. So all those things taken together kind of led us to the 3% levy recommendation. As you can see, the total general purpose levies that we discussed at the top here are actually set to decrease by about 2%, or $141,000. The increases on the required police and fire pension funding $566,000, which kind of gets to that increase of $425,000 or an overall 3% levy increase. Next year, we have roughly $9.8 million in principal and interest payments on our general obligation debt. As we discussed before, that will be abated, but it is officially part of the total levy recommendation for 2023 for this estimate of $24,465,744. That estimate would be roughly $24 increase for a home with a fair cash value of $300,000 or about $2 a month. 3% is also a little bit less than the average increase in levy over the last 5 levy years at 3.3%. So that is the summary of the 2023 tax levy estimate, and happy to entertain questions and discussions.
Questions? Go ahead, Paul.
Comment as much as questions. I appreciate a lot of the work that you've done there. You know, I always make a comment. I don't think that we really have any other good choice other than to accept increases for the increases in our pension. You know, as you can take a look, you know, the increase in pension has eaten away at the amount of funds available to run the city, and I think that it's put us in some challenging situations. I appreciate you not finding ways that we don't have to increase the funds that it takes to actually run our city, but I don't see that we have any choice but to pass through increases in the pension, which is controlled by at a state level and just handed to us. So thank you for the work that you've done. But anytime we come up with solutions on how to get pension costs under control, I'm all ears.
Okay. Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks for your presentation, Bill. I will say I have a lot of constituents, especially those on fixed incomes, that are concerned about their property tax bills. A couple years ago, I asked if we could explore alternative sources of funding for our pensions. And I'm wondering why this is going to be finalized in December, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And our budget workshop is in January, correct?
Yes, January 22nd, I think.
Okay.
We have a workshop.
So I guess for me to really do my financial due diligence and justify a property tax levy increase, I need to go over the budget first to have a good understanding of all of that, and if there are other opportunities to explore for revenue streams. I just don't think long-term this is sustainable. I get what you want to do, and I want to fund exactly what you want to fund. I just want to look at other ways that we can pull in revenue streams, kind of like what we did with the street program. We thought of something different. We came up with it. It sounds like we got a good solution for that. So for me, I'm going to hold off on supporting this right now. There's other questions I have too. For example, the general fund reserves is currently at 46.1%, and I know our city policy has it at least a minimum of 25%. So, and that's good. It's not a bad thing. But we're 21% over where we need to be. And I'm just wondering, that's tax dollars sitting there that perhaps could be put to work maybe for a year or two. It's not a long-term solution. I don't look at it that way. But that would be something we'd have to discuss in the budget meeting, which is after the fact when this is approved in December. So not a lot of opportunity to explore different options here. So for me, I can't support this tonight, but I just wanted to make some comments in general on that.
And that is, to your point, that is one of the challenges. We need to set this and adopt it now in December ahead of the budget process. So there are some challenges with that, and some of the things you referred to, we can certainly discuss further if you'd like.
Could we in the future, because I noticed in the last 2 budget meetings, they were in, or the property tax levy increases, they were November 7th and November 8th. Could we perhaps next year coordinate that a little closer to a budget meeting?
We're statutorily obligated to pass it in this exact time frame. It has to be passed in December every year, and we have to present it as an estimate. I think it's 21 days before that is passed. So this is the exact window we have to do it in every year, unfortunately. and it's always going to be, one has to come before the other based on the way the funds work, and this is so we can get those numbers to the actual county to assess the value. So we're obligated to do it in this manner, and our fiscal year runs with that May 1 fiscal year.
Okay, so in 2021, we discussed this exact same conversation November 7th, and 2022, it was November 8th, I believe, somewhere around there. So this meeting tonight has to be at this specific date?
We're basically within a couple-week window where we have to give the estimates before we have the public hearing in December, and the public hearing has to be conducted in December.
And I'm okay with that, but I'm just wondering if we could perhaps pull in part of the budget conversation just a little bit sooner, just to understand or justify this to our constituents, or at least to my constituents, because at the end of the day, when they open their mailbox and look at the bill and somebody that's on fixed income, it's tough for them. It's very difficult, and then we're going to talk about utility rates, another very challenging thing we have to go through as well. But that's all I have to say.
Right. Go ahead, Paul.
I wanted to respond just because there was one thing that was brought up in a policy position. But as far as dipping into, and this is just speaking on our financial policies, anything that we would take a look at our reserves, those are reserves that are funded by tax dollars from previous tax situations, and taking a look at years and decades, to build that. I would very much be opposed to using reserves to pay for things that were not durable goods, because you take a look at those are long-term funds, and anytime we touch those should be for long-term strategies, taking a look at long-term debt, different things like that. But I also think that we need to be very, very, very careful in taking a look at eroding our reserve position. That should be a long-term policy discussion. And the second thing that I wanted to respond with that is because I would love to find ways to reduce the tax burden on our residents. Of course, sometimes you can tax shift, but I think that your increase, this is one thing that I know that I spend time thinking about. This is the highest inflationary period that we've been in, but that's also, and when you're on a fixed income, that is difficult, but, all the goods that we buy are inflating. Wages are inflating. I mean, it's just how inflation works. To keep a number this low, I do have to give credit, but at the same time, I think that we have plenty of work to do to find additional sources, finding a way to make, increase commercial activity in our city, and other discussions that we do need to have through additional, financial conversations, which goes back to thinking that we should have, more regular finance conversations so this can stay front of mind for all of us up here and looking at solutions to, the growing challenges of funding services in our city. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ed.
Regarding police and the firemen pensions and the goal of having them 100%, funded by 2040, you said?
Correct.
Is that as simple as saying 2 to 3% a year is what we're going to see in increases for that, or how are we going to get there?
That number is going to vary based on a lot of factors. Mainly, how do the investment returns of the various funds perform on a year-to-year basis? What's the demographic changes, mortality, retirement, different things, versus the assumptions, wages, payroll level increases, those sorts of things. So I'd like to say 2 to 3%, but it's probably going to be a higher number on an average basis going forward.
But that time frame of 17 years now, that is a good number?
That's
good number of years?
That's the 17 years until 2040.
To get there?
To get there,
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ryan.
So, following up on Brian's question, are there alternatives? If you didn't want to go down this path, if you wanted to look at, hey, maybe this isn't the most sustainable thing to look at every single time this comes up to meet these pension obligations, are there alternatives out there that realistically we can consider to meet this threshold without going into, your reserves? Or is the reality of what we're looking at with these numbers, there's not something else on the shelf that you realistically can go and do?
One of the things we've discussed just from a concept standpoint is if we do have some one-time funds that we realize during the year, would be the potential of making an additional pension contribution to the funds, trying to get those percent funded numbers a little bit higher, so get those dollars working a little bit more to generate more returns. But that's something we're kind of just starting to look at from a concept standpoint as something to try and help us get to that 100% 2040 deadline that we wanted to get to.
And one of the other considerations is that, you know, as we talk about city finances and revenue sources, we want to make sure those are diversified. But in terms of pension contributions, we want something reliable and steady. So the last thing we want to do is be reliant upon sales tax for our pension contributions. So as we present more and more options to diversify our revenue sources, ultimately to fund our general operations, that allows us to dedicate more of those tax levy funds towards the pension obligations and keep that a little bit steadier and more controllable. But that does require some different revenue sources on the other side to get our general operations funded.
Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you. Okay, within our reserves, our policy is 25%. And we're saying we're at 41% now?
46.1.
46.1. Now, is that anticipating the future? What is the future projection of that number? Is that going to decrease or increase? I'm sure you must, I'm presuming you have a 5-year.
Yeah, I mean, we're working
plan
on a 5-year outlook, and
what does that look
we're
like?
not seeing I'm not seeing a lot of major changes in terms of that going forward. Obviously, 100 things can happen that might change that, either positively or negatively. But we don't see a huge swing either way at this point in terms of that number.
So we're at 46, whatever you said.
Yeah.
And our baseline is 25. I don't see why we can't go into that fund and use it for other things. I mean, I think that's too high. I'm always been a proponent of making sure we're above 25. But to me, that's a lot more than I think we need in there. And as I said, just go back to the property tax increase. My house has got reassessed. It went up 7.9%. We just did a sales tax increase this year. We raised the property taxes last year, and the county is considering raising property taxes again. And what the school district would do, I don't know. I'm just looking at the total burden on a homeowner. I think there's got to be a better way. And I understand the pension situation. If this was a private pension, I don't know, it wouldn't pass at that number. Okay. So yeah, I think we need to look into this a little more deeper before we raise taxes again. Thank you.
Yep. So, I mean, if you dip into your general fund, right, that's not going to be a sustainable, hey, we can do this every single year, because you're going to start to drain that. You're going to be back into the same spot of, well, how are we going to pay for these things? I think in the moment is we can't make that a sustainable, we're going to do this every single year, but perhaps with the reading the room where people are right now, is this maybe a time where you would look at doing that, to say, versus raising this at this one time, knowing full well we might be coming back, well, more than likely be coming back next year and the year after and going and raising that? Is this, given how the economy is, people raising just, or is there a reason why you guys have said, you know what, actually looking at that, this is why we can't do that or shouldn't do it?
I think when we landed on the 3%, part of it did take into account our overall financial position and the strength to the fund balance, as Alderman Titus mentioned. One of the concerns, if you're trying to reduce a percentage increase on the levy, is that it's cumulative. So unless you're going to go back to the subsequent year and adjust back for the amount that you reduced, you're kind of find yourself in a repeating situation. So that's a concern with looking at the levy estimates from just that lens of fund balance. So, but I think we did take into account the overall strong financial status of the city in coming up with this recommendation.
And that's also consideration to use other revenue sources, as you can see. The recommended increase is not even capturing what the pension increase are, so it was finding other sources to actually fund the remainder of that, so everything wasn't reliant upon the tax levy, but still capturing some of that growth.
Go ahead, Paul.
You know, going on my other comments, because as we're taking a look at whether we're reserved at the right level, I would still recommend that we take a look at, you know, if we want to look at reserves, using them for long-term positional situations. We've used the debt financing in the past, so if there was any discussion if we're over-reserved, I would caution people to take a look at, and which will have a cascading effect on lowering dollars that we need to operate the city, and it's looking at reducing our long-term debt positions. Because if you take a look at, why we're reserved at the level we are, but it's offsetting, the very significant amount of long-term debt that we have. So rather than using our reserves to fund ongoing operations, which in any business or government it's a problematic idea. Take a look at, improving our position by using long-term funds like that reserve in retiring some of that long-term debt, because we've gotten here and we need to be reserved at that level to keep bond ratings and things like that because of the amount of long-term debt that we have. It's more complicated, than that. And I just think the idea of using reserves to fund continuing, operations is to be avoided at all costs.
And that's, sorry.
Go ahead, Brian.
I'm just curious, when we approved First Street Plaza, we took money out of reserves, right?
We really took money out of the variances that we had in the current year in terms of revenues over expenditures, and some one-time transfers we had when we were closing some certain funds, like our self-insurance health fund. So when we closed that, we had a $2.2 million transfer back to the general fund. So it's really a combination of one-time transfers from closing funds and some revenue over expenditure variances. That's kind of really where that.
But it was wasn't it like $3.8 million roughly?
Roughly.
$3.8 million.
Yep.
So I kind of look at it as, and I get your point, and this is not an annual thing, but if we found $3.8 million and you're looking for $500,000+, and I know you're looking for a compound, whatever, but I'm just thinking if it provides some relief to residents for 1 year, business owners that own real estate, commercial property, whatever, I think that's money that's not being put to work sitting in the general reserve fund. That's just my opinion. I don't think it's a long-term solution. I think we need to look at other revenue sources, but that's kind of my thing. If we can find $3.8 million for the First Street Plaza, I think there's an opportunity to find some to cover this year. That's just my opinion.
Go ahead, Ron.
Just to clarify my point, this is not going to be an ongoing thing. I'm not going to fund any projects in the general fund, in the reserves. This is a one-time deal, or two-time, depending, until we figure out a way to get these costs under control, whatever we got to do. I just want to do it a one-time or two-time deal until we figure out as a council, what are we going to do?
Can I just ask a question? I'm sorry, when you say get these costs under control, you're referring to the pension costs specifically, or just the overall operations?
Sorry, I had trouble hearing you.
I said when you say get the costs under control, are you talking about the pension costs specifically or the overall operations?
All operations, to find out, so we don't have to keep raising our property taxes.
Well, in one comment
else does.
I'll make to that is just that, we're similar to any other operations, any other business, in that we're subject to inflation every year. The cost of doing business goes up from a products, services, all of that perspective. So it's just unrealistic to expect the city operations to stay at a flat level for decades, considering the fact that we're subject to the whims of the economy. And I know the inflation CPI last year was pretty significant. So we're trying to reduce where we can and capture different revenues to support those operations, and that's why you're seeing this 3% versus a 5% or plus that some of the other taxing bodies may be doing. It's trying to pull from some of those other resources that we have and not put it completely on the tax levy.
I don't see why we still can't review our budget and our spending.
Well, that was my point about reviewing the budget as we're discussing this to have a thorough understanding. It's like this piece is completely separate, and maybe it's easier to understand when you're pulling it all together. And it's like kind of like this will be done and over with in December, and then we're going to talk about the budget. And to me, it's kind of like a comprehensive approach, but that's just my opinion. To Ron's point, it's doing due diligence to go over a budget and say, hey, and maybe everything you're saying is we see that, and that's what it is. But for me, that's my whole thing is I want to really do my due diligence with the budget review. So.
Amy, do you have a question?
I did. I'm curious how dipping into the reserves would impact our long-term opportunities to borrow money, to have a good credit rating. What would those impacts be? Because to me, from what I've heard in your presentations, having that reserve is a positive in those regards?
Yeah, there's some positives in terms of maintaining the city's bond rating, having funds in case of an emergency.
Right.
If there is an economic downturn, that is when it may be appropriate to bridge the gap between when revenues dip and when you see eventual recovery. Those are some situations where it may be appropriate. We do have a lot of capital projects out there that still need to be discussed and require funding in the future. So I know we talked 2 weeks ago about how we've been able to strategically have this $9 million reserve now in the capital projects fund beginning of this current fiscal year, but that's not going to necessarily cover everything that we need to do long term. So there's a lot of different scenarios and situations where it may be appropriate. The concern with the levy and the estimate as we're talking tonight is really the cumulative effect of doing a reduction, knowing that unless you're going to go back and recoup that the next year, it's not a one-time adjustment.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Ryan.
So, I think everybody up here owns a house. I think a lot of us are in the same spot looking at this. It's an easy message to say, hey, we're not going to touch this number because, we want to be mindful. But I'm fearful that we're kicking a problem to a different budget line item, that we are not being realistic about. It's not as if we have, we're not building the Ferris wheel on the river and we want to spend the money. You have capital improvements, you have debt, you have pension. I mean, that's ultimately where our money's going. And if you say, hey, in this moment, we're not going to do this, or we're going to dip into reserves, ultimately you're just pushing the air in the balloon to a different spot and having a bigger challenge. And that might be okay in this one moment that makes you feel better, but ultimately you're still in the same spot. Like, we have increased costs, we have increased obligations, your pensions, your capital improvement. In one particular context in a conversation, it might make you feel better that we didn't do X, but we're going to be living it in 3 months when we have to go figure out how you're going to fix your roads, or how you're going to do this. And that's my fear, is this is all part of a larger problem. To Ron's point, is, man, things are expensive, things are costly, and as somebody who spent a great deal of time last year going through the budget, probably more time than staff wanted to spend, it's not like we have frivolous spending out here. It's not like we have, big ticket items where maybe we don't need. So, yeah, I am supportive of saying, maybe this isn't the moment, but the reality is it's not going anywhere, and there's not like something else on the budget's going to fall off to say, there's your $500,000 to save right there. It's not there. So that's my concern.
To your point, Ryan, isn't it worthy to explore other revenue streams as an option? I mean, are you open to that idea of just kind of getting creative with the financial revenue streams? Like, for example, with the street replacement program. I thought it was a great program that we came up with. I mean, it's dedicated for the streets. I think it has minimal impact on residents. It's choice. So, I mean, I get your point. It makes a lot of sense. I get exactly what they need. I support what they need. I just want to get creative with what we're doing, and the only way to start that conversation is with a budget meeting. And when you have a budget meeting after this fact, it kind of makes this a moot point when we get there. But that's where I'm at.
It's a very valid point, saying, hey, when the timing that you're looking at these things and what can you do, what might be an option, I completely agree. As somebody who I think was the only person up here who wasn't wild about the sales tax increase the first time around, was exactly this point, was feeling like once you pulled that lever, that was your big club in your bag. And now you start looking at meeting some of these other obligations, it gets harder and trickier, and that was my reluctance, although you want to fix your streets. You want to invest in your capital infrastructure projects, so I get it. I think, again, the challenge with this is in the short term, it might make you feel better to say, hey, we're not going to touch, we're going to freeze it. But in a quick cycle, you're going to have other things that you're going to have to pay for that are going to be drained out of there, and you're going to be right back in the same spot. So,
go ahead, Heather.
And I know that, that kind of commentary has come up, like, be creative, what other sources do we have? And I know, at least since I've been here the 2 years, 2 of the workshops, we've talked about all the opportunities we had for additional revenue sources, and a lot of those have been turned down, including even just trying to get our utility rates where they need to be based on our infrastructure needs. So every time we don't get some of these increases we need, that means projects are getting cut out. And eventually, we're going to get to a point where operations have to start being scaled down. As Ryan said, and I know that he and I went through a lot of this last year, was there isn't a lot of discretionary spending in our budget. So when the money's not there to do things, it's projects that I know have been, asked about by council, things that are needed, Red Gate Bridge being repaired, Piano Factory Bridge being repaired. Those are the kind of things that we're not going to be able to do if we can't get the funding sources for those. And we did increase the sales tax, and that was a big help, but specifically for our roads or a number of other capital projects that we still have needs for, and we're working on getting a comprehensive list together, because that list grows every single year, including lead service lines are on that. So there are just more things that the city is going to be obligated to do, and we just have to have funding sources to do those. And unfortunately, we just cannot keep those at the same operations level dollar-wise that we've had for a decade.
Go ahead, Paul.
I do catch a point from you that I totally agree with, which is we should be having more detailed conversations about our financial position and financial policy more often. That is a very well taken point, because a lot of these issues are complex. Because I would go to, what are our best opportunities to raise revenue without, putting more burden on a taxpayer. But those are things like, how do we become, like net positive in our commercial environment? How do we bring, high attractive regional commercial, to St. Charles? So we are net importers of tax dollars. So, like a Costco is a great example of a great business that is bringing people from a wider market area. People are driving 20 minutes rather than 7 minutes to come to a Costco type business. We're all very excited about Whole Foods coming to town, which is going to be a net importer of tax revenue into St. Charles. But those are very complex strategies that go into, what's our commercial policy? What are we doing to recruit businesses? And things like why it's important to invest in First Street. That is going to be a huge driver of commercial and social, importing into St. Charles to get other people to and discretionary, contributions to our tax revenue. But those are complex decisions, and we should be having these conversations to find those creative solutions. So I take that point as a very, very good point, because this is complicated, but I do think for right now that this is a good job. But it's one step as we need to keep going farther and refine our policy, our financial policy, to meet those goals. Because you are right. It's tough out there, and we need to make sure that our policies support, our tax positions. But for right now, I think we've done a great job.
Go ahead, Ryan.
So Brian mentioned that previously we tackled this in early November. So are we in a window right now where we have to take a vote today, or do you have a little bit of time to go through some of these things?
So this is approving the official estimate. This is not actually approving the tax levy to be final.
Okay.
So this kind of kicks off that process where this estimate would then be formally voted on by City Council after tonight. That gives a 21-day notice in order so that we can get through the publication process so that we could get the tax levy approved at the first meeting in December. Ideally, we'd like to do the first meeting in December, and just in case there's a hiccup or a snafu, we have that second meeting in December to get the levy approved.
So if you don't have support for it here tonight, then what happens?
Well, tonight's really just the estimate, and then if, we can take it to the subsequent meeting, we go to City Council for further discussion.
So for tonight, you just need this is just for the preliminary estimate, for tonight's purpose only. Is there a motion and a second? Second by Lencioni, seconded by
Besner.
Bessner. Can I have a roll call, please?
Lencioni?
Yes.
Gem?
Yes.
Petrilla?
No.
Wirball?
No.
Besner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Sokaitis?
No.
Folks?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Munn?
Yes.
Okay, that motion carries. Thank you very much, Bill. Next up is public comment. Do we have any public comment tonight? Anyone? No public comment? See none? Any additional items from the mayor, council, or staff? I do not see any. With that, I'm going to ask for a motion.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn. So moved by Wirball.
Second.
Seconded by Folks. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
On the board.
The ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah.